All right, everyone, we'll go ahead and get started. Oh, we've got a few more people joining us. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jenna Harris, and I'd like to thank you for joining our virtual Knowledge at Noon program. I am the Education Manager for YOLO Arts. Just a quick reminder, please go ahead and make sure your microphone and your video streams are muted so that we can ensure a smooth streaming experience for everyone who's joining us today. Knowledge at Noon is a free monthly speaker series featuring artists, historians, and agriculture professionals that explore themes central to the YOLO Arts and YOLO County Historical Collection exhibitions at the Gibson House and Property. I do have a few housekeeping announcements of upcoming exhibitions going on. At the Barn Gallery this week on Thursday, which is tomorrow already, we have the Lighter Side Humor in Photography will be opening up, and they will be doing a Facebook preview or a live Facebook reception at noon tomorrow. So please be sure to follow us on Facebook and join in for that. And then the Barn Gallery is also opening. They have a new show as well, and they will be having new winter hours. The Barn Gallery will be open from 3:30 to 6 p.m. On Thursdays. So with that, I would like to remind you, when you do visit our galleries, please make sure to wear your mask and practice social distancing. Of course, we will have hand sanitizer and things like that available for use. Next up, I'd like to introduce my partner for today's event, curator of the YOLO County Historical Collection, Yulia Bodaniu, to introduce today's topic.
Hello, thank you, Jenna, and thank you all for being here. We are excited to have David Wilkinson and Rolf Frankenbach speak on some of our greatest natural resources in the region, our oak trees. So Woodland is known as the city of trees, and our oak trees are markers of our shared history. On the Gibson property, we are very proud to have a approximately 300-year-old oak tree that existed long before our modern era and will continue to exist long after us. And we treasure that that asset that we have very much so. So therefore, it is imperative that we continue to support the work of conservation and preserve YOLO County's tree culture through organizations such as the Woodland Tree Foundation, which David and Rolf are very much an essential part of. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Jenna, and then we will kick off our program. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Yulia. Today, at the end of David and Rolf's presentation, I will host a moderated Q&A. To submit a question, please click the chat icon at the bottom of your screen, or if you're joining us by phone, click More and then Chat. During the presentation, I will monitor your questions and compile them to discuss with our speakers at the end. So of course, I want to welcome our speakers, David Wilkinson and Rolf Frankenbach. David is a woodland cultural historian and author. He has published books on Woodland's architectural history, theater history as part of community activism to save the historic State Theater. And in 2021, he will publish Gertrude's Oaks, a history of Woodland's relationship with its trees. He is the co-founding president of the Woodland Tree Foundation, founded in 2000, and the foundation has planted over 5,000 trees in and around Woodland with the efforts of local volunteers since then. Professionally, David is an economist with a focus on community facilities, historic preservation, and renewable energy. Also speaking today is Rolf Frankenbach. He has 30 years of experience in environmental management and natural resource protection with various county and state government agencies. He is a longtime board member of the Woodland Tree Foundation and serves on the city's Sustainability Advisory Committee. Rolf and David completed the first ever digital mapping of Woodland's mature native valley oaks. Rolf is a part of a local citizens group who are assisting the city of Woodland with revisions to its tree ordinance with a focus on oak protection, reforestation, and an interest he is extending to a broader YOLO County. Thank you, David and Rolf, for joining us today.
Thank you, Jenna. Pleasure to be here. Hi, everyone. I recognize a lot of friends and neighbors, colleagues here. So looking forward to giving you more insight into the Tree Foundation today. And I want to introduce my friend and colleague here, Rolf Frankenbach, who I've had the pleasure of working with for many years now on woodland tree programs. We have a lot of fun doing it. So Rolf and I will just take you through a few slides here and comment on them, and just give you an overview of our history, what we work on, what we're currently focusing on. And we would encourage and appreciate any questions, comments, ideas you have. And with that, I'll admit somebody else into the meeting. I think I'll pull up the presentation here.
There we go.
You can find out more about us on woodlandtree.org. And if anybody needs a free shade tree, that's where you go to sign up. Our motto is building community through canopy. We all love planting trees, and we feel good after we've done it. We can see the results of our work, but it's just as much about building relationships with friends and neighbors in the community. I've met so many wonderful people planting trees from all walks of life, and that's part of the pleasure of doing all this work. This photo here on the left is actually a founding board member, Ken Trott, working with young people to plant a tree at the Gibson House. I think this was taken on Arbor Day probably 10 or 15 years ago with that oak in the background. And you can see other people here that we've done a lot of concrete cutting around town, particularly in the downtown where there was just hot concrete, and we planted a lot of trees throughout the neighborhoods in the downtown Woodland area. So we were founded 20 years ago, celebrating our 20th anniversary. To this day, we're an all volunteer run organization. We have a board member, we have about 14 board members. We're all hands-on tree planters, and we do a lot of the work as well. We do almost all the work as volunteers, relying on lots of other help from the community. So we don't have any staff members. We do partner with other organizations, like when we've had large grants to do lots of tree planting, we'll typically contract with other organizations to help us. So we recently finished up a 3-year program funded through the state of California. We planted 1,200 trees around town, and we partnered with Tree Davis. I think David Robinson might be with us here today. David's a longtime president, board member of Tree Davis, and we work collaboratively together for the benefit of Yolo County. We've also partnered with the Sacramento Tree Foundation. And we do a lot of work at schools with scouts, all kinds of groups here in town. Here you see our mission. Some students planting trees out on the highway between here and Davis. We've adopted about 5 miles of the roadway between Woodland, about halfway down to Davis. And Tree Davis works, particularly David Robinson, on the southern end of the corridor between here and Davis. Just a snapshot of some of the various projects we work on. the Neighborhood Shade Tree Program is a program we started 6 or 7 years ago. It's a little bit like the program that the Sacramento Tree Foundation has been doing a long time with SMUD. And we have had PG&E as a partner in the past, but essentially any homeowner or renter who would like a shade tree, a free shade tree, can contact us and we'll arrange for that. So it's a program we wanted to implement on private property. Historically, we've done most of our work on public land, like around city streets and parks and school sites and that sort of thing. We'll talk more about the oak mapping project. Rolf will get into that shortly, and the work we're doing currently with the City of Woodland on updating our tree ordinance with a focus on preserving our native oaks. Here's a photo of First Street, which should look familiar. First Street never had trees really over its 150-year history. A lot of these downtown side streets never had trees once the native trees were removed. And it wasn't until about 1990 we had any trees downtown. So we've added hundreds of trees downtown, doing a lot of the concrete cutting, as you see here, which I think makes for a much more inviting place to hang out at. I just mentioned the Neighborhood Shade Tree Project, which we're currently running now on a smaller scale. Board members are going out and meeting with homeowners who request a tree and helping them select the tree, the best tree for the right location. And we order the trees from the nursery. We help them check for any underground utilities to avoid conflicts. And then we come over and plant the tree for them. So it's a nice program. People enjoy it. I think we planted well over 1,000 trees now in people's front and backyards that over time are going to absorb a significant amount of greenhouse gases. In the olden days, woodlanders planted trees more ceremonially. Arbor Day goes back to about 1903, started up by the women here in the community and involved the whole town. It was quite an event. There were a lot less things to do on Saturdays than there are now. So when you had an Arbor Day, it was a big event. The whole town turned out for it. And they were intent on beautifying the town. And we see the results of their labors today with some of our old trees. Today, we have broadened that paradigm, and we're very mindful of planting for ecological purposes, in addition to beauty and shade and all the other benefits of trees. But nowadays, we're planting with the idea of, decreasing woodland's carbon footprint. And we're also trying to re-oak areas that historically grew valley oaks naturally. Valley oaks evolved and spread into Yolo County after the temperature warmed. Historians say about 15 to 20,000 years ago came into the valley oaks, spread into the valley from northern part of the country up in the mountains. And the valley oaks are perfectly adapted here. Our native oak, we have very fertile soils, alluvial soils, and historically plentiful groundwater. So it's a perfect growing medium for the valley oaks. That's why it's one of the largest and tallest trees in all of America, right here in Yolo County. And they're native throughout California in the low-lying areas, maybe going up to 2,000 or 3,000 feet. So we're making a concerted effort to plant oaks, for example, out here on the highway, which was historically an oak woodland that had a lot of oaks until settlement, and it was converted into farming. And I think Jay Lee Toole's on the call today. Jay Lee's a PhD geographer from UC Davis who wrote a really interesting dissertation all about kind of recreating what this area between Davis and Woodland was like in these watersheds of Puda Creek and Cache Creek, and reconstructing the native vegetation here with some amazing mapping work, drawing on it was a very interdisciplinary type of research. We learned a lot from Jay Lee's paper, and inspired us to continue re-oaking woodland and this region where oaks originally thrived. And Rolf will speak more about this, being on the city's Sustainability Advisory Committee, but they're really overseeing the city's climate action plan, which are actions the city's taking to reduce carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. And one of those actions is the planting of trees, preservation of trees, to expand our tree coverage in woodland from where it's at now at about 15% to 25% over the next 15 years. And we planted 600 or 700 oaks on the Highway 113 corridor between Woodland and Willow Slough. And it's amazing how fast they'll grow in the good soil out there, as you can see. Some of our trees now are 25, 30 feet tall. They've been growing for, 15 to 20 years. So we planted to date over 1,000 trees out there that we care for. We have to water these trees a couple times a month for a couple years until they get established. And we'll be out there planting more trees that Rolf is growing whenever we get some more rain, hopefully soon. I'm just gonna quickly go over the benefits of trees. There's a beautiful photo here, by the way, by one of Woodland's talented photographers, Susan Bovey. I think Susan might be on the call. Susan recently took this photo of one of our landmark cork oak trees. I'll touch on our landmark program soon, but we're very mindful of planting trees these days, and it's going on throughout California by many groups like us. And fortunately, voters pass environmental bonds periodically, and then some of that money trickles down to organizations like the Woodland Tree Foundation, like Tree Davis, and we have money to plant trees. And some of the cap and trade money from the state of California trickles down for tree planting. So we're fortunate to live in a county and a state that really puts a lot of emphasis on mitigating global warming. As we all know, it's a very, very serious issue that we all face here. And we plan to help people conserve energy by planting trees strategically in their yards so that they shade the house and reduce energy usage and downstream burning of fossil fuels. We've been doing a lot of planting in parking lots and along sidewalks to reduce the heat island effect, which is basically areas that don't have shade, so it radiates a lot of heat. There's been a lot of public health studies about the public health benefits of trees, reducing of asthma rates and so forth, and just mental health. And wildlife habitat, you know, valley oaks are really ecosystems unto themselves. They host a lot of beneficial wildlife. This photo here down below, this is a Swainson's hawk nest taken by David Rosen, a local wildlife photographer. David rented a cherry picker and was able to get up kind of even with the nest at a safe distance away and shot these photos of nesting Swainson hawks here in Woodland. And tragically, this magnificent 200-year-old tree was recently poisoned, killed. Stunning that individuals can be so selfish and literally kill a 200-year-old oak tree, but it happens. And it happened here in Woodland a few months ago. So trying to protect Woodland's namesake tree, the Quercus lobata. Well, lobata meaning deeply lobed leaves. Quercus is the oak classification. But we truly have some remarkable oak trees that have survived here very happily through neglect for 2 or 3, maybe even 400 years. And we'd like to preserve those for as long as possible. So Rolf, this I think it'd be a good slide for you to cover, since it really kind of galvanized us to really get serious here about preserving our native oak trees, especially the ones that are perfectly healthy and get removed for various reasons.
Yeah, so this oak tree was, it's in the downtown old part of Woodland on Cleveland Street, and it's right across from City Park, where we have several landmark oaks now that are marked as landmark trees. So kind of in the heart of where a lot of the old oaks still exist in Woodland, you know, the ones that are still standing. But this was a tree that was removed, and you know, it kind of galvanized us to start, you know, thinking about the long-term issue of oaks being removed that are, you know, resources in the sense that they're very old and they provide habitat and they just provide a sense of grandeur, you know, to our downtown area. But we thought that this particular tree, to our, you know, its location, it didn't seem to be a threat to anybody. It was basically right against the sidewalk, leaning more or less over the street. So we were upset that it was removed. So that kind of got us to, you know, these things take, you know, a long time to grow to this stature, but they can be removed immediately. And there ought to be more, I don't know, more effort to conserve them. So that led to our efforts to, well, how many oaks do we have in Woodland? You know, if we don't know what we're dealing with, it's hard to recommend actions to promote their conservation if we don't even know what we have. So after that, we got involved in mapping the oaks, which I'll talk about later in the presentation in more detail. So I'll take it back, hand it back to you, David.
Okay. So in addition to working with local government on ordinances and so forth, we we work to try to raise consciousness about the value of oaks. And one way to do that, under the ordinance, any citizen can nominate trees to become landmarks. And so we've been doing more of that in recent years. And we've come up with the signage program. This is, and the school district's been very enthusiastic. We have landmark oaks now at Lee and Douglas middle schools. And we just had 2 more approved, one at Dingle Elementary and one at Beamer Elementary. And these interpretive signs become educational for students. So, and the city will mark its own landmarks with simple post signs. This is a cork oak at First and Marshall Streets. Here's Rolf at Douglas Middle School showing students how we measure trees, and then students help plant new valley oak trees in the front of Douglas last spring. And just recently, the city council approved 5 more landmark trees that we nominated. I think people might recognize this monarch oak here at the Gibson House. It and this other monarch on Casalinda Drive are what I've called Woodland's king oaks. We've measured them. They're the 2 largest living oaks in Woodland. They're about 7 feet in diameter. And Rolf, who's been gathering data more on the age of oaks by counting rings and looking at their size and looking at equations that scientists have come up with, Rolf, I think it's your feeling these 2 monarchs could be upwards of, what, 400 years old, possibly?
Yeah, I think I have a few oaks that I've counted rings that are over 200 years old, and they're far smaller than these 2 trees. So I presume these 2 trees are probably much older than those 200-year-old trees. So I would say 300 on the very low estimate and maybe 450, on the high end, just if I had to guess. So certainly these trees represent, the California before there was any European settlement, and they were already mature oaks by the time Woodland was founded. So good reason to call them landmark trees.
The oak at the Gibson House was known as Lone Oak, L-O-N-E, because the Gibsons named their estate, their farm, Lone Oak, because of the oak. It apparently was one of the few oaks out here south of Woodland where it was more like a, what's the term I'm searching for here? Not a woodland, but a
Savannah?
Savanna, thank you, Rolf. Kind of dotted with oak trees. But around it, you have older oaks now that are probably progeny from lone oak, but the Gibsons wisely built a little cabin under it, and then they eventually built the larger house. But they certainly love this oak. And then this one over here, if you look at 1937 aerial maps of Woodland, it was out in the middle of a farm owned by the Gibson shading farm structures. And so it served a very practical purpose. And then when the subdivision was put in the 50s, it was a tree of such grandeur, I think the subdivider didn't have the heart to cut it down, which is pretty remarkable. Usually if a tree's in the way of a road, the tree is no more. But the road and sidewalk were built around it. Okay, I think for the rest of the presentation here, we're going to focus just a little bit more on data we're gathering to present our case for the city improving its ordinance to provide better protections for oaks. And that really started with better understanding what we actually have here in Woodland. Rolf?
Yeah, so in 2018, as I alluded to before, we, as a result of that large oak removed downtown, that appeared to be a healthy oak, we thought we would go out, try to do a survey of, how many oaks do we have? And so we just went out with, had 4 of us go out and divide the city into city council districts. I guess 4 of us, because one of us had 2 city council districts. We just tried to map all the, locate by address all the oaks in Woodland, and we consolidated the results on our spreadsheets that we recorded the data on. We came up with 880 trees that we noticed as best we could, down to the 12-inch size. So anything smaller than that we didn't include, but when we either measured a tree or estimated its diameter at 12 inches, we included it. So we know we got 880 trees or thereabouts. And we did a more recent, we got a little bit savvier over time. We got into ArcGIS with some help from Jay Lee, who I think is on the call. And, actually got an ArcGIS mapping software, so we could go out and actually precisely locate the trees. And we focused on larger trees because we were trying to find out, how many what we would call heritage oaks we might have that have been around for maybe 100 years or more, that we would consider historic. So we did a little more accurate survey in this year, and we found 205 oaks over 40 inches in diameter. And I figure, based on some data that I've collected on trees that have been cut down, where I have rings where I can count the interior growth of the tree by counting the annular growth rings. Some of those trees are, 70 years old on the low end, but I think based on the trajectory of some of the trees that are much, much larger than ones that I've actually counted rings, I think they might be 400 years old. So we have a wide range in age. And most of those trees are on private property, and the current ordinance that the city has only deals with trees that are on, public property, as far as, maintenance and protections. Another thing we did this last year is we surveyed. We were looking at, if we were to pass an ordinance on oaks or to recommend changes to the ordinance, how much citywide support would we get from the citizens that might be affected by those regulations? And so we sent out some surveys and, asking people what they thought about enacting some protections for heritage oaks. And most people that responded to the survey, I can't say that everybody responded to the survey, but the people that we actually got responses from, about 3/4 were in favor of some conservation measures taken by the city to conserve large oaks. And based on what the city is currently doing, a slight majority felt that the city ought to be doing more than currently. We did another follow-up survey that was focused more on larger oaks because we didn't get a particularly large response from the first survey. So we reasoned that if we sent the surveys out to people who owned large oaks that had a bigger footprint, so to speak, or were more, more dominant on the lots, where the value of the tree might be more apparent to the owners, they might have a better response rate. And that was true. We sent out surveys to all the remaining people that had large oaks. We got about over 40% response, 47 out of 117. I think it's like 42 or 43%. So almost pushing half of the people responded, which I think is pretty high response rate. And the vast majority of people felt that valley oaks were, they valued them more than the typical tree, and that the city should be doing more to preserve those trees. So we felt pretty comfortable with those results in working on a new ordinance that we want to engage with the city on to see what we can do to help conserve our oaks. And David, did you want to talk about the Citizens Advisory Group that we put together on oak conservation?
Okay, Rolf, I'll just touch on that, and we'll be wrapping up this presentation in about 6 minutes. But we formed an oak citizen study group to work independent from the city, but the city was invited to the meetings to really think long and hard, seriously, about what type of ordinance we felt the community needed, what type of protections we felt the oaks warranted. So we looked at several other cities that protect their oaks, and we presented to the city a matrix of recommendations about 1.5 years ago on more of a regulatory approach and more of a volunteer-driven educational approach. One of the weaknesses of the current ordinance is the only oaks it protects are heritage oaks 33 inches in diameter that are in the path of new development. So we lost 80 trees when the Country Oaks subdivision, the infill project on Mathmore was built. They clear cut 80 trees. There was no legal protection. We don't want that to happen again. Spring Lake, if you go over there now, you'll see 2 or 3 large trees that were preserved. They're almost like mini parks, and they're really nice. There's shady benches underneath them. So the Sustainability Committee recently heard this presentation, and they unanimously recommended to the City Council that they make the adoption of a new ordinance high priority in 2021. So we're working on this new ordinance as we speak, Rolf and I and several other people, and we'll be meeting with some of the city council members soon to see what their appetite is, the comfort level. We'd like to see, even though we recommended oaks over 12 inches in diameter being protected, by protected we mean you need an arborist report and to be reviewed by the city, and if the tree is unhealthy or dangerous, of course, you'll get a permit to remove it. If the tree's healthy, you really shouldn't. If you want to put in a swimming pool, add on to your house, you have the right to do that, of course. So a permit would be granted, but perhaps there'd be some kind of mitigation, paying into a fund where we could help low-income tree owners maintain their trees or planting oak trees elsewhere in the town. We don't want this to be draconian. It'll probably be controversial, but other cities do it, and we think there are reasonable ways to do this. And then here are some of the voluntary actions we recommended, some of which we're working on. A couple beautiful photos there. Fall Color by Susan Bovey. Re-oaking is an interesting concept. They're doing some of that in Silicon Valley, where valley oak trees were removed, by the thousands. And some of the high-tech campuses, I think, like Google, are reintroducing oaks. So we're borrowing from that concept. I think Jay Lee called our attention to that. There's a new research park in Woodland that'll break ground at 113 and 25A probably next year. And we've been encouraging the city to have the developers plant a lot of native oak trees in the green open space areas, because that historically was a fertile ground for valley oaks until they were removed for farming. Why don't we end with a couple poems? We had a dedication of the Shakespeare Oak Monument a few weeks ago at City Park. The Shakespeare Club planted it in 1916. Shakespeare Club members came out, read some poetry that was written when this tree was planted 104 years ago, and then other people recited poetry. It kind of turned into an impromptu poetry slam, which maybe we'll reprise for Arbor Week coming up in March. I think it'd be cool to explore that with the Gibson House, and maybe at schools. But poets and writers have always written about trees, and two of the Bay Area poets sparked the first California Arbor Day in 1896. John Vance Cheney and Ina Coolbrith, who was Woodland's first poet laureate. People hope and labor and despair, laughter they have and sorrow. The trees their gods composure wear, tomorrow and tomorrow. And the Shakespeare women were thinking about tomorrow. They were thinking about us when they planted this beautiful tree 104 years ago that we all enjoy today. Best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The next best time is now. So tell your friends and neighbors we have shade trees. This is the Mandela Fellows, scholars and entrepreneurs that come to UC Davis every year to learn more about energy programs. And they've come out and planted trees with us every summer. That's been a lovely, lovely time. I think we'll stop here and throw it open for any questions or comments or ideas you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rolf and David. That was fantastic. Thank you for sharing all the work that the Woodland Tree Foundation is doing, not just in Woodland, but around the county. I do want to go ahead and open it up for questions from the group. If you have question for Rolf or David, please go ahead and utilize that chat function at the bottom of your screen. There should be a chat icon there, or if you're joining us by phone, I believe it's clicking more and then chat to submit questions. And we have a few coming in. First, I just want to ask, how do you date a tree without cutting it down to count the rings?
There is techniques for that. It's called coring, and we kind of considered that. It's, we were going to work with somebody who worked for the state that had done that. We weren't able to get together to accomplish that. And then it's a little controversial too, because there's some concern about introducing disease into the tree. What it involves is basically boring a core into the tree that's about 1/4 of an inch in diameter. It's just a drill that leaves the center intact, and you can extract that from the tree. And you take it out and then you let it dry, and then you sand it down so it's flat, and you have a sample of the tree. Another issue with oaks is that the wood is extremely hard, and most coring is done on commercial timber, which is softwood trees. And the reason they do it is they want to find out how quickly they can harvest the trees, how fast they grow. And that's not really our concern here. We just want to know how old the trees are. And because oaks are so large, we'd have to get a core that was about 3 feet long. So it seems like it would be a very difficult endeavor to do that. So my approach has been, as trees inevitably are taken out, I'm trying to grab samples of the tree trunk. I have a 4-foot wide, what they call a cookie, which is a cross section of a trunk, in my garage right now that's drying. So I'll have a very good, accurate count on how old that tree is once I do the sanding on it. So it's slower going, but it's actually more information per tree when a tree is removed. Now, of course, I'm not advocating removal. I'm just taking advantage of the fact when trees are removed, I can actually get some data from the tree.
So in the meantime, in terms of the oak here on the Gibson House property, that aging is done through estimates based on measurements and size, since we're not doing those more invasive methods?
I have an idea how many inches it takes for the tree, how many years it takes the tree to grow 1 inch in diameter. And I know the diameter of that tree, so I can kind of rough ball an age for it. You know, it's probably growing at, you know, 5 to 8 years to get 1 inch. So if I multiply, say, 6 times 80 inches, that's 480. That's a estimate of the age of that tree. That's probably not, I bet you it's within 100 years, but you know, we'll see, you know.
Rolf, you're speaking about lone oak, not the one that had to be removed.
Yes, I'm talking about the Gibson oak. Yeah, we don't know how old it is, but you know, other trees that I've counted, the rings that have been over 200 years old were far smaller than both those trees. So I'm very confident that those trees are far older.
Definitely. Well, and certainly spending a lot of time on the property and being in the presence of that tree, you can certainly get a sense of the history and honestly the presence of the tree that goes so far back. Throughout your presentation, you guys mentioned your education efforts a few times and outreach efforts. How do schools or students get involved with the Woodland Tree Foundation?
Several different ways. We've done direct outreach to schools. Some of our board members, they'll go out and contact principals or teachers, and one of our board members, Ken Trott, Ken has done classroom basic instruction on tree science, and we do outreach to schools. We met with district officials, and sometimes we just reach out to principals and they want to organize maybe a cleanup beautification program for the start of the school year. So for the last several years, it seems like we've hosted planting events at different schools in the district, and we donate the trees and are there to help the parents and teachers and students plant the trees and properly learn how to do that. So we've done that at a number of schools, and yeah, we'd like to do more of that in the future. Get younger people more tuned in to the importance of trees and how to properly plant the trees and take ownership of their schools. And then they have to commit to watering the trees. It takes 3 years to plant a tree, is the mantra, because you really need to, in our environment, give it summer water for 2 to 3 years to get it established. We mulch the trees very well when we plant them, but somebody has to commit to doing that.
Absolutely. Well, and so important for the prosperity of our community, and getting those students involved at a young age is so important. At one point, you guys were mentioning a tree that had been poisoned, and myself, of course, a little bit horrified at that idea. Of course, I'm a bit of a nature freak. But are there things that community members might be doing unknowingly that could be harming their oak trees? Or, you know, what are ways that we can avoid harming them or poisoning them in the future?
For large oaks that have never been subject to summer irrigation, it's basically considered an issue where you water during the summer because they're used to dry summer conditions. So large oaks that are that probably grew to maturity under dry summer conditions, it's probably, you know, important to not water within a few dozen feet of the base of the tree in the summertime. So for instance, if you go to Beamer Park, you'll see some mature oaks there, and the city has removed turf from within probably 30 feet of their trunks to prevent the decay that can, you know, compromise the root systems of large oaks that grew under dry conditions. A lot of our other oaks in woodland are younger trees that probably grew under those moisture conditions with summer irrigation. So their root systems are probably more adapted to those conditions. So it's probably not as big of a concern. So, you know, it depends on how the tree reached maturity. And once it reaches maturity, you don't want to drastically change the conditions that it's growing under. I think that's probably the most important point to keep in mind.
Sure, sure. How would you recommend, say, if there was a new homeowner who came into becoming a caretaker for one of these trees, approaching that, not knowing how it came to maturity? Is there certain signs that they can look for?
Yeah, if there's you know, indications of decay on the tree, like hollows in the tree where moisture can get in, that could be a sign that there's probably decay going on in the interior of the tree, which means that it will make it structurally compromised. It'll probably lose, you know, large limbs at that point. So it's probably a good idea to have a certified arborist take a look at the tree at that point and make an assessment as to whether it's posing a risk to any structures on the property and what should be done to mitigate those risks. Typically what an arborist will recommend is pruning of the tree of some of the additional branches that probably don't provide much support to the tree as far as generating, you know, food for the tree, to reduce the weight of those limbs. They might also recommend cabling the tree, although I think that's kind of a past practice. It's not recommended as much today, where they tie up the tree so that when it, you know, if one limb sags, it can be supported by other limbs. Problem with that is you have to adjust those every so often as the tree grows, and that's often not done. So mostly it's going to involve pruning a tree to reduce excessive weight.
Good to know. Good to know. And one final question. You guys have mentioned your neighborhood shade tree program, and of course, community actions to nominate trees for landmark status. How can people go ahead and do those things and reach out to you?
Well, anyone can nominate a tree really at any time. You simply write a letter to the city and provide your rationale for nominating it, maybe put it into historical context, perhaps, or if it's a remarkable species or specimen, you could nominate it for those reasons. I don't think I mentioned it, but this last batch of trees, we had 5 landmarks approved and then 5 specimen trees in city parks that are just beautiful examples of different species of trees to just, you know, educate the public about the diversity of trees that we can grow in woodland with our good soil and climate. So anyone can do that.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys so much for your information. I do want to direct people, if you want to learn more or get involved, to the Woodland Tree Foundation website on screen now, woodlandtreefoundation.org. And of course, I encourage you to follow YOLO Arts on Facebook and Instagram to stay up to date with our partnerships with organizations like the Woodland Tree Foundation and other efforts and programs that we have going on. We are at YOLO Arts CA on both Facebook and Instagram. Thank you everyone for joining us. This has been an amazing session, David and Rolf. And we are so thankful that you were able to join us.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Yulia. We really enjoyed it. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.
Absolutely. Thank you.